The moon hung low in the sky, casting a feeble glow over the deserted streets of Thornbrook. My shift at the small-town diner had ended hours ago, and I found myself trudging home through the eerie stillness that only midnight could bring. It was the kind of silence that made every footstep echo, every rustling leaf seem like a sinister whisper. As I approached the old Victorian house I called home, my steps faltered. Something was off. The usually dimly lit street lamps had gone dark, leaving my path illuminated only by the pale moonlight. My heart quickened its pace, a rising sense of dread clenching at my chest. I unlocked the creaking gate and cautiously made my way up the cobblestone path. The front porch light, which I had left on, was extinguished. I glanced around, searching for any sign of movement, but the night remained still. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone, using its weak flashlight to guide me inside. As I entered the darkened house, I was met with an unsettling chill that clung to the air like a shroud. The feeling was almost suffocating, and a bead of cold sweat formed on my brow. The living room appeared as I had left it, the antique furniture cloaked in shadows. Yet there was something amiss, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that set my nerves on edge. I took hesitant steps forward, my senses on high alert. And then I saw it, a pool of darkness on the hardwood floor. My heart thundered in my chest as I trained my flashlight on the source. The beam revealed a gruesome sight that left me gasping in horror. A body lay sprawled on the floor, bathed in a chilling pool of crimson. I recognized the victim immediately. It was Mrs. Blackwood, my elderly neighbor from across the street. Her eyes were wide open, fixed in a silent scream that seemed to accuse me of some unspeakable crime. Panic surged through me and I stumbled backward, my mind racing to make sense of the nightmare before me. I had no reason to harm Mrs. Blackwood, nor did I possess the strength to inflict such violence. My thoughts whirled in a dizzying frenzy. Then a noise, barely audible but unmistakable. Footsteps. They echoed through the house, deliberate and unhurried. My heart pounded like a drum as I realized I was not alone. Someone else was in the house with me. I crept toward the kitchen, my flashlight quivering in my trembling hand. The darkness seemed to close in around me as I strained to see through the blackness. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then a voice, soft, chillingly calm.
You shouldn't have come home, dear.
I froze, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the kitchen wall. There in the doorway stood a figure cloaked in darkness. A hood obscured their face, leaving only a glimmer of malevolent eyes. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The intruder took a step closer, the moonlight revealing a glint of a wicked smile.
I'm the one who makes sure secrets stay buried.
In an instant, the intruder lunged at me, and I screamed as their hands closed around my throat. Darkness closed in, and the world faded to black. When I awoke, it was to the harsh glare of flashing red and blue lights. Police officers swarmed the house, their voices a cacophony of questions and commands. Mrs. Blackwood's lifeless body was wheeled past me on a stretcher, a haunting reminder of the horror that had unfolded after midnight. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words fell on deaf ears. They found me in the house with Mrs. Blackwood's blood on my hands, and no one would believe my story of the hooded intruder. As I was led away in handcuffs, I cast one last glance at the old Victorian house, the scene of a murder that defied reason, and a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my days.
It was an old, creaky house on the corner of Maple Street, and my new neighbor, Mr. Anderson, lived there. I'd heard whispers from the other neighbors about him. They said he was strange, a recluse, and rarely seen outside. But curiosity got the better of me, and one chilly autumn evening I decided to introduce myself. I knocked on Mr. Anderson's door, and it took what felt like an eternity for him to answer. His eyes were piercing blue, and they seemed to scan me as if he could see right through my soul. Despite the unease I felt, I managed a friendly smile and extended my hand. "Hello, I'm Sarah, your new neighbor," I said. His bony fingers wrapped around mine, and he nodded slowly, his lips barely parting to reveal a faint, forced smile.
Nice to meet you, Sarah.
The conversation was stilted, and he didn't offer much about himself. I learned he lived alone and had been in this house for decades. As I left, I couldn't help but feel that something was off about him, but I shrugged it off as mere paranoia. Weeks passed, and my interactions with Mr. Anderson were limited to awkward pleasantries. Then, one night, I awoke to strange sounds emanating from the wall we shared. It sounded like muffled cries, anguished and pained. Concerned, I called the police, and they arrived promptly. They knocked on Mr. Anderson's door for what seemed like an eternity before he answered. His appearance was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. When the police questioned him about the sounds, he brushed it off, blaming it on television noise. I was unsettled by the encounter, but without concrete evidence, the police left. The sounds persisted, growing more frequent and disturbing. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. One evening, as I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to decipher the source of the cries, I heard Mr. Anderson's voice. It was hushed, yet frantic, muttering about forgiveness and release. Dread washed over me as I realized the horrifying truth. My neighbor was tormenting someone, and they were begging for mercy. The next day, I decided to investigate further. When Mr. Anderson left his house, I slipped into his yard and peered through his grimy basement window. What I saw would haunt me forever. In the dimly lit basement, a malevolent scene unfolded, casting a gruesome shadow over the very essence of human decency. There, within the cold, damp confines of the subterranean chamber, a sinister cage stood. It was a grotesque contraption, barely large enough to accommodate a human form, designed not for safety, but for suffering. In the corner of this horrific dungeon, a pitiful figure cowered, her frail frame contorted into a nightmarish semblance of itself. Her once radiant skin had lost its vitality, transformed into a ghastly pallor that mirrored the ghostly surroundings. Tattered rags clung to her emaciated body, as if they too had borne witness to her torment and were now mournfully clinging to her form. I called the police immediately, and they arrived with a SWAT team. They stormed Mr. Anderson's house, rescuing the terrified woman from her prison. She was rushed to the hospital, her physical and psychological wounds beyond comprehension. As for Mr. Anderson, he was arrested and taken away in handcuffs. It turned out he had a history of mental illness, but it was the darkness within him that chilled the bones of everyone who encountered him. In his deranged mind, he believed he could cleanse souls through suffering. The ordeal left a scar on our once quiet neighborhood. The house on the corner of Maple Street stood as a haunting reminder of the horrors that can lurk behind closed doors. It was a stark lesson that even the most unassuming neighbors can hide the darkest secrets, waiting to be uncovered by those who dare to listen.
The story I'm about to share is not one I ever thought I'd tell. It's a dark tale of obsession that once consumed my life. It all began innocently enough, with a single rose left on my doorstep. The note attached read, "A token of my affection." At first, I was flattered by the gesture. Who doesn't appreciate a little romantic intrigue in their life? I imagined it was a secret admirer, someone shy yet deeply infatuated. A smile curled on my lips, and I tucked the rose into a vase. The next day, another gift arrived. This time, it was a heart-shaped locket with a tiny photograph of me inside. The note was simple, "To keep you close." My heart raced as I wondered who this mysterious suitor might be. The gifts were lavish, and I couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. As the days passed, the presents grew more frequent, and their nature began to shift. Perfume arrived, a scent that haunted my every breath, and lingerie in my exact size, a secret revealed to the world. The notes became increasingly possessive, speaking of a love that bordered on obsession. My friends grew concerned, urging me to be cautious. But I couldn't help myself. The attention was addictive, and I yearned to uncover the identity of my secret admirer. I allowed myself to be drawn deeper into the mystery, convinced that love was at the heart of it all. Then came a package unlike any before, a lock of my own hair severed from my head as I slept. The note was chilling, "To hold on to you always." Fear pierced through my fascination, and I finally contacted the police. They promised to investigate, but the gifts didn't stop. A toothbrush with bristles stained with my own toothpaste, a journal filled with diary entries from my past, and finally, a dress identical to one I owned, but with a sinister twist. It was stained with something dark and unidentifiable. The note that accompanied the dress was clear in its message. I want to be with you, even when you don't know it. Panic gripped my heart, and I locked myself inside my home, barricading doors and windows. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. But the gifts persisted, each one more invasive and terrifying than the last. A photograph of me taken through my bedroom window, a copy of my house key, and finally, a chilling letter that revealed the depths of my secret admirer's obsession. He spoke of plans for our future together, of a love so profound it bordered on madness. I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator to uncover the identity of my stalker. Days turned into weeks, and finally, a name emerged. Nathaniel. He had been a distant acquaintance, someone I had met at a party years ago. When the police arrested Nathaniel, he remained unrepentant, his eyes glazed with delusion. He declared his love for me, insisting that he knew what was best for us. It was a nightmare, hearing those words spill from his lips. In court, Nathaniel was sentenced to years in prison, but the scars he left on my psyche would never fully heal. The gifts had stopped, but the nightmares continued. I would forever be haunted by the relentless pursuit of my secret admirer, a twisted love that had turned into a waking nightmare.